Aiden Corcoran, it is a pleasure to welcome you to the Inner Entrepreneur podcast.
Thanks very much, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. So it is.
Do you know when I reached out to speak to you, my thought was that we would have a real conversation about entrepreneurship. And I suppose this podcast is about the inner entrepreneur, and part of the inner entrepreneur, I think, is realizing what entrepreneurship is all about. And I want people to do. I mean, I've covered mindset and meditation. I cover all these sort of things to help the entrepreneur find resources other than just growing their business. Um, but I also think entrepreneurship can be presented in a way that's maybe not accurate to those who haven't experienced it. And I just felt that this was a conversation that you were well up for having. That we would have a real conversation about what it's really like. So I hope that sounds like a plan to you. But so, but to get there, maybe we'd start at why on earth did you want to become an entrepreneur in the first place? There are easier things to do.
Yeah, there are easier things to do, and I'm trying to convince my son, who seems to want to follow in his father's footsteps, who thinks everything I do is amazing. I'm saying, wouldn't it be much better to be a history professor, however, and we could go and travel and understand, the Romans and the Carthaginians, and we could understand rather than being like a Roman and scrapping every day. And I suppose the piece of an entrepreneur as a word never really sat well with me in St. Paul. That it always seemed to be a kind of fancy word. It took years, maybe 10 to 12 years before, you'd introduce yourself. I still introduce myself as Aiden Corcoran, mechanical engineer. And I actually only saw my degree this morning, and I said, wow, it's 25 years. I said,
Well,
I said, that is a while. And I still introduce myself as an engineer because I think in my core, way down in there, I'm still that techie geek when I was a kid, and I'm that guy who's just loves machines and things like that. And I became an entrepreneur inadvertently in 2010 officially. But when I really look back before that, I think I was an entrepreneur anyways. Literally, I give you the story in the late 80s. My father was he is now a retired guard. He's retired for 25 years, and he's a retired guard. And my mother actually was a homemaker, as they call it back then, or housewife as it was back then. But she was an entrepreneur actually, in the sense she set up a curtains and blinds business. And literally, as we were going through secondary school, she went around to houses and put her card in the doors. Early stage social media, and did blinds and curtains for these things, and her business grew to where she had it until maybe the crash in 27, 28, where she had put all her kids through college and everything like
right,
that. And so it's only, but she never called herself an entrepreneur.
right.
She didn't even call herself a businesswoman. She called herself just someone who made blinds and curtains. But she had three people employed at one stage,
Yeah.
and a small little business. So really, from that, I took inspiration. And she had a great way with people, great emotional intelligence. My father, being the guard, of course, I guess when they go to Temple More, and I hope you just actually tune into your podcast because I let you
I,
into
I
secret.
just don't think he's a listener,
I
but
think
there you go.
they
How would
sit
I
you
know?
on a table and they extract every ounce of emotional intelligence that you can have and go, this is the way it is. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? But one of the things I got off of him was I got a job to cut the lawns in the local car station. And I realized very quickly after that I had use of, and I hope the Office of Public Works or the guards don't listen either and come back to me for 30 years of old fees. But I got the use of a lawnmower, and I got all of the
Benefit in kind, I call that.
yeah, and all of the petrol that I could use, right?
Wow.
And I cut the lawn. I used to get it was called a score a month. It's about 20 quid a month was my fee, my wages. But I had the use of this lawnmower and the petrol, and I realized very quickly, obviously, I could make some funds with this, cut other people's lawns with this thing. And very, very quickly, I realized the best customers that I had were generally older ladies, widowed ladies. So I narrowed my market down and decided to dispense and focus on this particular cohort because they paid They all paid cash, I guess, but they paid the biggest cash. And when you were around, they usually had more jobs that they were willing to throw a few bob to the young lad with. And I realized my cohort was a bingo bus full of old ladies that I used to go around, and I made a fortune that summer, driving around or walking around the village, cutting lawns and figuring things out. And that was my first little company. And I remember I put a sign up in the post office as well because I realized that they'd be there on Friday mornings collecting the pension. And they go, that's the young fella. I didn't put any number on it. I just knew it was an old ground. So I think if we're true entrepreneurship, I think started probably back in 1987, but I left it down after that and really then began our companies in 2010, and that was. And I very, very much remember always having the feeling as a PLE worker at the time, constrained and trapped, and just feeling that not that I could do better, but just that I wanted to kind of do something. You know what I mean? And I was 30. I guess I would have been 35 when I started, so that would have been 2010. And we kicked off with what was a consultancy service agency back in 2010. Myself and a few others. The crash had come at that stage, and multinationals were outsourcing their need for contingent workers. We were going to be we
So
were
did you leave employment to set this up?
I did leave employment just prior to that to go and become a contingent worker,
Okay.
probably at the height of it. And then this was beginning to start in 2010. They wanted to consolidate two different companies. It wouldn't have suited us in that we were a group of engineers at the time that would have been farmed out to maybe agencies or consultancy companies we didn't really want to work with. We positioned ourselves in one sense, we used as much leverage as we could to position ourselves as an alternative collective. We did that, and then between the jigs and the reels, a company called Horizon was set up, and we offered engineering services to those multinationals in the west of Ireland at the time.
Mm.
And we very quickly grew right throughout Ireland then at the time. And my experience of that, of course, when I tell that, everyone goes, wow, you had an international engineering business. And I think we grew from six people right at the start of 2010 to maybe about 2013, 2014, 77 people
Wow.
dotted around Ireland and in the US and in Europe. And yeah, it was really good. And I focused, as everybody does, on revenue, and I was making so many millions. And we were doing this. And I suppose I pushed myself forward in the collective group that started the company to lead it, became the CEO, eventually had the largest shareholding of that through acquisition out of other guys that just wanted to do different things. And then we let it. And of course, but the challenge was at the time, and this is where we began to start talking. The challenge was at the time it was a very, very difficult thing to do because we had very expensive labor force that we were having to pay obviously monthly, and the challenge was that we were dealing with large corporates who like to pay 90 days in a month. And so, and this was new to me because as an engineer, I guess, we all know accounting, but we don't know accounting until you live it. And this great demon of my life called cash flow arrived on the scene and decided to sit down and go and become my best friend. And, or not my best friend, my mortal enemy, I think.
Yeah.
So that was a difficult one because it was 2010, 2011, 2012. If you remember at the time in Ireland, my experience of banking was effectively I used to call it. It was kind of like the scene from Pale Rider with Clint Eastwood. I don't know if you remember where he kind of comes into the town. It's an old shoddy town, and all of these mothers come out, grab their children, pull them in, and then they slam the door and they me over into the sheet. And so my experience of banking was that, and I wasn't the guy in the house. I was Pale Rider, and they were all looking out, going, "Yeah, yeah, we're open for business." But the last person they want to deal with is this really complicated company that did things many, many. Happy that you got paid by the big multinationals, but
Mm.
really we got, I remember some banking experiences and just really nice people, but they hadn't a clue of what we were talking about, what we were actually doing. And I remember halfway through the conversation trying to explain something, really dawning on me that this was realistically, I needed to come up with a different conversation because it wasn't my local bank hadn't a clue, and I was actually probably just frightening them with everything I was just saying and talking about Texas and talking about going up to New York to do this. And so yeah, so we how we did it, I'm not really sure. I look back in those early years between 2010 and 2015, and we would have been covering salary bills of quarter of a million a month, and
Wow.
big money going out because people were, and how, we had to do it in every way possible. You leveraged every means possible, and we worked with companies, and in fairness, negotiated as good best terms as we could. Yeah, so we did that, and it was hard going at the time. And around 2017,
So just can I ask you a question there? That's a very big salary bill, but you're selling services that's that's what you have to have.
yeah,
So was the company profitable for you? It just was that the cash flow was the big issue because you had to pay your engineers on a Friday, and the your clients didn't want to pay for 90 days or whatever. Was it literally just that gap that was the big challenge?
yeah. I mean, the big challenge was the profitable it was, but the challenge was that the faster it was, number one, growing at an exorbitant rate,
So you
growing at,
might have needed to slow that down.
yeah. In hindsight, could I put? But when you're dealing with a large company, they want you to be a large company because
Yeah.
they don't want you to be the small guys because somebody else. And so it's a little bit of, could we have shut it on reflection? I think we did as best we could.
Mm.
Could we have done it any different? It wasn't linear, to use an engineering term. This wasn't,
Yeah.
this was we grew at the rate that we tried to achieve at the time.
Mm.
Where if we when you think of it, if you take like a quarter of a million of a salary, and if you take everyone's 90 days in the month, and you do really quick maths on that, well then that's somewhere about 750,000. If you take in the month and you add on another month, if you're close to the million, and then you're talking about €1 million of cash flow needs.
That you need to have sitting in cash. But the interesting thing that's coming to mind is because we said what we want to talk about was the reality of entrepreneurship.
Sure.
And when you go on social media, whether it be YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, or something, people love now to talk about scale. That you want to scale your business. Are you going to 10x your business?
Yeah.
And they don't maybe go into the fact is that can be really, really challenging because when you 10x anything, you 10x the positive, you 10x the negative.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as you scale your business, you had more problems to deal with, and this is part of the reality. 10x your business is not just about a sales number. It's about how do you support everything behind that? How do you still provide that level of service to a client?
Yeah.
And more than anything else, how do you fund that?
Absolutely, yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think if I look back, and if I'm being honest with you, and I look back at that stage of our lives, you know what I mean. We're talking about 15 years ago. I guess I was a younger person. I was a newer entrepreneur. I was looking perhaps at I was looking at society, and society puts on pedestals the
Yeah,
Mark Zuckerberg's. Well, he's not topical. Well, he's quite topical at the moment, but probably not
not
positively.
popular, not on this side of the world anyway. Yeah,
Yeah, the Elon Musks, these guys or these people, even and not only that, but if you read down through, you'll see about the startup that grew from 0 to 100 million, and the Collison brothers, you know what I mean, worth
yeah,
billions. Uh, what's a thought that we could do the same in engineering? No, not be the Collison brothers, but we'd certainly become a large player in the market as soon as we could.
mm,
And I think that we would have very much focused on the 10x mentality. And
mm,
I guess maybe for the sake of it, I didn't feel there was an environment, even mentally, that I could be in that space to not think like that. You know what I mean? As far as I was concerned, that was probably the place to be. Now, what happened was, because you start focusing, and I have long since decided not to listen, not to listen, but not to learn the mantra that what is it? Revenue is flattery, isn't it? And cash is king, and it goes on to that. I've decided, because if I hear another one telling me that, I'm just going to.
vanity, insanity. Yeah. That's it. Revenue, sanity, profits.
But of
You don't
course,
like
I might bite my lip and go, of course, it's totally right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In the sense of, if you 10x your business, you 10x your need for the hunger with regards to the business that it
Yeah.
has to be able to scale it. But the challenge is at times as well, if you don't 10x it, do you fall into a void that you can't get out of and therefore can't sustain the growth? Some businesses can only grow at 10x. Do
Mm.
you know what I mean? And maybe there was a little bit of a fear of us in that at the time when we look back, at that one. And it was a difficult one to navigate. And we navigated that to where I guess it brought us significant cash flow issues, and then significantly difficult business journeys with regards to kind of managing that. We then brought it to a particular place to where we eventually I got a call, I think, from a large customer, very large pharmaceutical business. We were working outside of Brussels in a place called Wavra. And anyone listening to the podcast that knows pharmaceuticals in Belgium will know who I'm talking about. And we got asked, we did a project for them. It was great, but they were 90 days end of month. We had 3 people on site there, and they wanted me to do another, double it up and go do further. And I remember getting the call and them just asking. I was sitting out in Westport looking with my office, and I had a window view of Cropatrick. And while I was on the phone, I was talking to them. And with the Belgian French accent, the guy was there going, "You can probably do this." And I knew, I just quickly ran the numbers in my head and said, if I did that, I'd probably need another 500,000 of cash flow.
Yeah.
I would make profit on it, yeah. But
Yeah.
I remember
If I
saying,
got paid.
no, yeah, I remember saying, no, I can't do it. And I
Yeah.
knew when I said it, that I said, I'm not going to get asked to the table ever again. And I
Okay.
just said and I didn't. And our project finished, and that was us. We were gone, and they dispensed with us, went on to someone else. But however, and I knew that was probably at the time then when we started saying maybe no a little, and then we kind of flatlined, and the business model had changed a little bit because sustaining the piece of what I would call engineering consultancy that we were doing was just costing a little too much, and then we needed to sustain. And we started to sustain then at about 2016, 2017, I guess, a sustaining model. And that wasn't necessarily something for me. I was looking around something different, and that's where we came across Cosmetic Creations, and my wife and I acquired that back in 2017, and that brought us on a whole other
So,
journey.
so well, let's finish journey one before we finish that. So you came to the end. Did you leave that business? Did you close it down when you bought out, or How did that journey come to an end for you?
So right at the time in 2017, I was CEO. I stepped aside, and it was kind of plateauing at that time, and we were probably recovering from the headaches that the cash flow was being brought in at the time. We were more stable. However, there was more revenue now being generated from recruitment, etc., than say consultancy.
Mm.
For me, that didn't fry the eggs for me, I guess, in the morning, and
Mm.
I decided I stayed on as a non-executive director on the board, and generally in touch with it weekly,
Mm.
with regards to it, and then less so as the years went on.
Mm.
As the leadership team kind of took it on, I was less and less involved in
So
it.
did what they were doing just no longer excite you or interest you?
No, it didn't. I mean, we pulled back to Ireland. We couldn't sustain the international work. We were doing a thing called consultancy around aseptic fill finish, which is all to do with sterile filling of bottles, which is, it sounds very simple, but if we take this little bottle here, if I have to put a liquid in here and to make sure no bugs are in that, well, there's a whole world of engineering that goes around the place to do that. And we were quite good at that at the time, but we couldn't sustain maybe an international reach given the cash flow requirements that were required. So I suppose the meat and potatoes of it was agency work, agency placement and recruitment, and we said, look, let's put it on the course for that for a few years. I stayed on for a year at the start to do that, and then my business partner Mark took it over, and he dropped it out of that, and then I stepped back. At the time, other opportunities had then presented themselves anyway. I suppose, I guess at that stage wanted to go and look at those ones. I was subsequently then bought out of that business about 2 years ago. And so
Mm.
it moved on, and is a very successful now recruitment and agency business run by a brilliant team and by great people. So, and they took me out when about the end of 23. So I spent about 6 years kind of just about the first few years involved from a board perspective, but in the last few years less so. Yeah.
I find that interesting because To me, I have two businesses, and bricks and mortar businesses, and to some degree, I don't. I'm not. I mean, they've kind of done the same thing for decades, but I'm not that caught up in what they do. I'm caught up in, is it a successful, profitable business? So, I mean, if if what we were doing had to change tomorrow to make us more profitable, more successful, that wouldn't bother me. It's a business, it's a function. The function of the business is to be run as a good, successful business, and generate a profit. And I have no passion for glasses of water. But if it turned out tomorrow that what we need to do was transition to selling glasses of water, and the business would be twice profitable, that would be cool. That would be cool. I mean, maybe because you're an engineer and I'm not. Maybe you're caught up in how things work.
Is
I'm just
it,
going, can
is
I
it
make the business
age
profitable?
maturity?
Bottom line.
Is it age and maturity, Paul?
Well, I certainly have the age piece. I don't have the maturity. I don't think it's age I don't know if it's age or maturity. I think it's priority. Maybe I think I'm not an engineer. I think as an engineer, you probably have a fascination for how things work. You want to lift the bonnet. It's not good enough. It's not good enough to. My wife is looking at buying a new car, and at the moment we're talking about it last night, and like I won't lift the bonnet and see. I don't tell me like what's it look like? How does it drive? What's it cost? Do I enjoy the experience? Don't ask me how everything works inside. I don't really care. I just want the experience. But maybe you go, whoa, whoa, hold a sec. How does this engine? It's an electric vehicle we're looking at. You probably want to know, how does this all work? And you're not satisfied unless you I'm get that's the question I'm coming to. Maybe you need to understand things, and I just want to make a book.
I think I think I agree with you. I think you might have hit a bit of a nail on the head on that one, and it might be a paradigm I haven't looked in that direction. Actually, it's funny that you say that. Certainly, it didn't when the team moved on and when we wanted to go in a different direction. No matter what I did, I wouldn't be able to get my head into the space that it was the. I don't like to say the right direction to go. It
Mm.
was the right direction to go, but for me, it wasn't. I Actually, it's interesting. I wouldn't have been a positive influence in that direction, and I recognize that because for me, looking at it, I couldn't bring myself. And it's not bring myself. It's not like you wake up in the morning and you consciously say, "Hey, you know what? I don't want like what those guys
Yeah,
do."
it
Like
just wasn't your nature.
just it's yeah, it's the whole frog and the scorpion.
Yeah,
You know the
yeah,
one where
yeah.
the scorpion stings the frog and he goes, "But it's just my nature."
I can't help myself. This is just who I am. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny, I mean, and the piece of it is that yeah, I mean, I look back on those 7 years, and they were good years, difficult years because the world was difficult at the time, and also we had a difficult, complex business, and our customers were difficult because they're pharmaceutical companies by their nature are conservative and
Mm.
they're also huge corporates, so things move at a snail's pace. I mean, the lead time to get a client was 18 months. You know what I mean? So you're not going to sit at the board meeting and go, let's get 5 new clients next month and try 5 different ones the
Yeah,
month after.
yeah.
So yeah, so funny, interesting. I couldn't and wouldn't have been good. And I think if you were to sit here and we were to talk with my business partner Mark, I think he'd recognize that, and he probably would reckon we do the thing that you have done many times in EO, the Joe Harry window, where what you know about yourself and versus what others know about you. It's funny. I think you might have pointed out a kind of known unknown of mine in the sense
Okay.
of in the sense of they would all probably smile in the room and go, "Well, that guy's not going in that direction. No matter what he says, he's not going to be able to do it." And so yeah, so I did move off at the time, and then we.
But sorry, I mean that in some way that's a positive thing, because maybe you have the self awareness to know your own nature, and to go, That's not going to work for me, and I need to go somewhere else," regardless of the business numbers or whatever. You go, this is just not me, and if I'm to be me, which is the only way I believe we find contentment, peace, happiness, you just have to go your own way.
And there, that wraps up. It's interesting. Surely, then, to be able to grow by 10x, you probably need to have that. I want to use the word not mental capacity, as in having, as in, but to have that mental capacity to say, like, this passionate vocation type drive to say, I'm going to drive this to go to the now. Because I think if I set, I obviously, and this is why I asked you the question was that maturity and age, because I'm hitting the big 5-0 now in the next 6 months, so it's reflective time for me. You know what I mean?
I hit the big 6-0 in the next 6 months or so. So
And I'm kind of saying to myself, right, you know what? I mean, obviously, you see, every business that we've done it from ground zero, and families and the bills, are dependent on that. So there's
yeah,
always the drive to make sure it's thing, but there was also the drive to make sure you hit this up here. And I find myself a little bit right now. We're in we're 3 chapters on from that chapter,
yeah,
and we're in the business, and we're kind of saying, well, okay, hold on, it's meat and potatoes time now here as well. Let's look at the growth. I'm sitting at this desk every morning at 7:30, and I'm
mhm,
looking at the running gross margin of the business. And
yeah.
because I can get all that information now, and I have little algorithms developed for myself that ping it up. I have my coffee and I go, "Yep, we're on track," or "No, we're not. We have to go do something." I
Yeah.
never did that in the last businesses.
Okay, so what I'm hearing there is that's a shift from the engineer to the businessman, because probably at this point in time the space I most predominantly look at the business is just those core numbers. What's the revenue? What's the net profit? What's the sales for each business? So I'm looking at those numbers. I don't dig beneath that, probably like you, unless something is amiss. If something is amiss, then you go deeper. I describe it like the pilot driving a plane, or flying a plane. You have the dash in front of you, and it's all green lights. You just let all the autopilot fly the bloody plane. But as soon as you see a red light, you go in. Whereas the engineer just has to go in all day long and
Yeah,
dig
yeah,
it.
because I'm there going, I love seeing a red light because I can strip it down and go, where is that coming from?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't like seeing red lights, but if it's a numbers red light, I do have the ability to strip in.
I
But
certainly,
anyway,
sorry,
go
go
ahead.
on, go on.
I was going to say you had that 7 year period with Horizon, and then you moved on, um, but you're now well hooked in, entrepreneur, whatever everyone will call it. So business is in the blood now, and the only option for you is to what's next.
Oh, I mean, the only, and this is the piece. Um, the only option is entrepreneurship.
Yes.
Yeah, I can write my CV, and I'm the most impressive CV I've ever read. And at this stage, we must have hired, my wife and I have hired over 1,600 people. No, not all at once, but like
Yeah.
there are times and so we've got 1,600 CVs.
Yeah.
But nobody is going to hire yours truly. I mean, in the sense of, I
Yeah.
mean, if you have a human resources expert sitting beside you and they say you should hire that guy, well, you should immediately get a new human resources person because I mean, it's the whole scorpion thing in the sense of, the nature is to do what we do now. And the funny thing is, 7 years on, then after 5 years, we did purchase we went on the journey continued where we ended up purchasing, rather than just advising manufacturer facilities what to do, we purchased our own manufacturing facility.
So this is 4 years ago, is it?
This was in 2017. This was about, actually, sorry, 8 years, 7 years ago, after I finished in the house.
After you
Sorry.
went, which you so yourself and your wife decided you would purchase a manufacturing
Yes.
facility, and so what was the motivation? What was getting you? What were you seeing as the future of that business at that time?
Well, there was a few things happening at that time. Obviously, Horizon was beginning to go into the direction it probably needed to go into, and leadership team were good enough without me, right? And in the sense of, what you call, we're going to go do that over here. I decided to go on. This came up as an opportunity. Literally, a phone call came from the guy that owned it at the time actually saw us on one of our PR pieces. Hey, those guys actually, ironically, those guys, they advise on engineering. I need engineering advice. I'm going to pick up the phone, call them. It was in our own little hometown, my hometown of Claremorris, County Mayo, which is in southeast Mayo. I said, and you know what? The irony of it all was my mother's curtains and blinds business used to operate about 30 yards down the road in
Wow.
this industrial estate.
Okay.
And when we were kids waiting for her to come out, my brother and I used to kick a football up and down the road. And we often kicked it into this little factory. And it was a small factory, 32,000 square foot at the time, 20 people, running a run rate of about, revenues about 1.8 million, servicing servicing companies in Ireland and the UK, formulating and then making cosmetic products for them. And when I say cosmetic, I'm not talking about perfumes and lipstick. I'm talking about skincare in general, soaps, shower gels, all that kind of things. My wife and I had been around advising through Horizon all these factories how to do things. The opportunity came up. We went in to advise them, and I think my advice was, "You're you need to fit out the place and put about £1 million into it." Which he kind of looked at me and went, I think he said, actually, I think his famous words was, "Hey, you know what? Maybe someone younger could do this," because he says, "I've had too many birthdays." You know what I mean? And
Yeah. So he needed to start. He needed to reinvent everything, is what you were saying.
immediately the place was 1980s level
Okay.
of engineering. It was in a poor state, and to be really honest with you, that's in where the opportunity lies. And like any entrepreneur, it's being able to walk in and look at the mayhem and turn around and smile and go, "Oh, this is good." You know what I mean? And
Yeah, but also what you saw, a few things there. One is you saw that you could fix it, and the thing is, so you saw the opportunity. I would have walked in and gone, "Well, this is a mess. I don't know how to fix this mess." So, like, it's a problem for me. But I think the other thing there, you talked about heading towards the big 5-0. Um, I think you begin to view things because I know it's again this in a forum. There's people of different age. I mean I'm heading towards the big 6-0, and you do begin to view things differently. So I don't know what age this owner was, but you're probably looking. Yeah, I take this business on. I have another maybe 10, 15 years in business. You know what I mean? So I have a runway here to turn this into a very successful business. I'd be thinking 10 years. I'm 70. Like I do not want to be sleeve rolls up in this shit. You know what I mean? So. Um,
yeah, and at the time, you're absolutely right. At the time, I'm in my early 40s,
Yeah,
even in my 50s, even now, it was the right decision. We
yeah,
bought it. We had to do the deal, and we bought it. Of course, we had no money.
yeah,
Even though we had this other successful business, sure,
yeah,
that was the cash flow cow, in the
yeah,
sense that she needed everything she had.
yeah,
But we had to figure out a way to be able to do it. So we ended up, and of course, the chap that owned it was wanted to retire and exit the building. So we ended up buying both the building and the business, and we raised the funds through some banking, through some. Basically, we invoice discounted the business itself,
yeah, yeah.
and then we raised the funds through that, and then we were able to kind of continue on and then take
So
on
the business funded itself then.
business fund. It was in a sense like some sort of queer or MBO where I
Yeah,
wasn't an M, where I wasn't
yeah,
an M in the sense of
yeah. But you allowed the business to fund you, and then
absolutely,
move on.
absolutely. So we took that over actually on February the 3rd, 2017, and we grew that business to the heights of where over the pandemic it grew to 18 million revenues
Wow.
and a very healthy net profit
Hmm.
that year. And
So
again,
that's a success story.
yeah, yeah. But of course, that was driven by this very strange thing called a pandemic, which
Yeah,
basically now we had in 2018 or 2019, we had grown it by fourfold anyway, right
yeah.
prior to that.
So
So
you'd
we
made a success. Had you reinvested heavily
Yeah,
in the
we
product?
reinvested, but again, I came with it, unfortunately, like that proverbial cartoon with the guy where he pulls the pockets out and, the flies come out of the pockets.
Yeah,
And so we reinvested every penny we kind of made back into doing up the floor, paint. Look at if 99 people out of 100 came into the building, you'd think it was a modern facility. If
yeah,
I if I walked in because I'm an engineer who built and my wife and I built for like we came originally from Hewlett Packard where we used to as part of my engineering career, we used to fly around the world expanding their facilities and
Yeah.
spending their money, 45 million here, 45 million there on places. And we build these huge futuristic facilities. If you walked into Claremorris and you 99 people out of 100 people go, wow, because
Yeah.
most
Yeah.
people never walk into a manufacturing facility.
No.
I
They don't
didn't
know what.
realize this until then. And so every customer that we brought used to place orders, 100% success rate.
Wow.
We got them on site, they placed orders because myself and Lorraine had made this fantastic facility, really, really sharp looking, and it looked good. But behind the scenes, of course, it was like the it was like the proverbial fur coat, no knickers kind of job. You know what I mean? Because it wasn't a class 10,000. It was there was no air handlers because we didn't need all of that and stuff like that. And
But often this is the essence of entrepreneurship, isn't it?
yeah,
Seeing a business you want to buy, but you have no money, but figuring it out, and
yeah,
then just going on the fly. I mean, the reality of it is that's how most businesses
yeah.
start up and grow. That's how most success stories
But this
evolve.
comes back to then you have to have a little bit, surely, then have the balls to be able to do it. And to have the balls to be able to do it, you nearly have to believe in yourself in some sort of an evangelical
Yeah.
way.
Mhm.
You need this kind of, well, I can do it because even though people might think this is very immodest, you know what I mean? Well, that you think you're better than everybody else. Well, you kind of need to do that because that's the only fuel you have.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's the only thing like the right thing I should have probably done was got a nice good job in the civil service. That would have been nice. And that's not to say for any civil service engineers out there that are listening, I'm sure
Yeah.
they do a great job. But it would be much more dependable, more stable, and I can guarantee you it isn't the rocket ship that I ride. So it isn't
Yeah.
anything what to call so. But the thing was with that,
But you would have been miserable because it's just not in your nature. I think in our first conversation you described yourself as a bit of a maverick. And if I was recruiting for the civil service, I'm going, this guy, he's a nice guy. He is not a fit, because they would want to literally strap you to the desk. They would want to
well,
strap you to the
the
desk.
funny thing you mentioned, I did go for a civil service one time, way,
And
way
they laughed, did they?
in the 90s. My father being he was the local kind of guard in charge sergeant of the area, so of course he was very proud to have his eldest son approach and maybe join the force back at the time.
Yeah,
And I remember going for the interview, and there were seven of them. There was three civil servants and I think four Gardaí. I think they were inspectors. And I remember sitting in the big chair with them all around, and them asking me about life and what do they do. I'm sure I was exuding engineering, how much I loved it.
yeah,
And and then they asked me a question in the end. They said, "How do you know you would be a good guard?" You know, and I said, "Well, I said, do you ever watch Hercule Poirot?" And they all looked at each other and went, "No." Well, I said, "I can always get who done it." You know what I mean?
yeah.
I remember the letter came to the house way back, maybe early 90s, and my father and I opened it, and it was, a PFO letter. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Basically, you're
yeah,
not
yeah.
going to be a guard on this watch.
Don't call us weak. Don't call us
Yeah,
weak. Call you.
but my
So
father, yeah,
in those early days of manufacturing, it was white label. I don't know what you call it, but you were basically you were the manufacturer for other brands.
yeah, we're manufacturers, but also formulators. So it wasn't just in the sense of white label of here's a bottle of
Okay,
something, take it
you
off.
were creating products as well.
We would bring you in, and if you came to us and you said, "Look, we distill your vision into something that was manufacturable and presentable," and also we had a very good idea of what the shops and retail kind of wanted, and so we'd be able to steer you in the right direction, etc., and bring people along. So we did that, and we developed many ranges for companies, and then we developed and then built those out. Particularly in the tanning area, we were doing probably, I think, nearly 80% of every bottle of tan in Ireland was nearly done from our facilities. We bought another facilities in Cork, which was the behemoth of a facility in 2019, which all I can say was ballsy. It was 110,000 square foot. We put on 60 more people down there, and with the expectation, with the now we had it wasn't just done fly by night. We did it because we felt there was good value in the purchase, and the other piece was we knew we wanted to get big enough so that we could facilitate large contracts orders from people like the discount stores, the Lidls and Aldi's, the Dunn stores, all those kind of things. We, albeit our site in Mayo was lovely and inspiring and etc. We were just getting boutique clients, and
Yeah.
their contracts could be smaller, and they wouldn't sustain large growth if we really wanted it. We bought that facility. We were able to raise quite a bit of money based on it, and then we went into. Then we came around the corner. 2018, I remember going, or 2019, we're going. Okay, we had a year of gas to get ourselves into position where we integrated. We had to integrate 60 people from Cork who spoke Cork, a
Yeah.
large multinational. They were all just post being laid off by a big, large corporate called Yves Rocher, French company. And then we had our little 60 people at that stage then in Mayo, 50 people in Mayo. And they spoke, they spoke small SME in the
Yeah.
sense of, and they spoke Mayo in the sense of they'd make something up out of a post-it note, you know? And they were so far distant from the large corporate mindset, it was unbelievable. Whereas over here, these guys could manufacture 400,000 units, but they do it in a corporate type style. And so we had to bring those two crowds together, and we brought that up. And then in January, I remember in 2020, the world. I remember sitting down, making a call. I was literally here in the house. I made a call to the guy, the operations manager, the GM that we had, the director at the time, and said, unless these contracts come into fruition, we're going to have to cut back and cut back heavily.
Mm.
And I literally left the phone down, and I was kind of doing numbers, and I happened to make a call to an Enterprise Ireland rep that I had at the time, because I was looking at expanding into the UK and the US, etc. And she said, "You don't happen to do anything in sanitizer, do you? Because there's this thing coming out of China called COVID." And we said, "Sanitizer." I said, "No, hold on." So I happen to have we had contacts in China, and I happen to have been there just literally 3 months before. And I put one and one together, and I said, you know what? If we make a million unit of sanitizer right now, we'll probably sell it. You know.
Yeah.
And I called the guy back, who I literally a half hour before told him we get a plan for reducing the workforce by 50%. I called him back and said, if we kept that workforce and added another 20, could we make a million units? He said, well, you currently have the capacity to do 4 to 5 million units a year if you wanted it. And I said, look, if I can raise the funds, and again, of course, no funds, had nothing,
Yeah.
but good idea.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and we said we can do it, and by I think 3 days later, I got a phone call from the HSE, and they were in bad state, and they asked us to a meeting in Dublin in Kilmainham, and literally on the back of we weren't smokers, but it was the back of a cigarette pack. We wrote what we could do, and I remember the guy looking across from me. There's a book in this, or in this particular one, he said, "What kind of numbers can you do?" And I wrote down literally a bit and post-it notes. It's somewhere akin to 300,000 units a month. And he says, I think you have something wrong there. He says, you wrote 300. I said, no, but I said, if I switch on for you, I can do 300. Now I said, that's when we start. We could probably go to 500,000 units for the month but I said, I probably need 6 weeks. And he
Yeah.
turned around. He said, leave it with me, said. And he came back in. He came back in and he went, are you serious? Those are the numbers you can do. I said, yeah, we can do that. I said, we just happen to own two facilities. And he, long story short, but he said, I'm going to send you on a PO. I said, how much do you want? I said,
Yeah.
because, and he goes, all of it. And I said, what does all of it mean? I said, obviously, all of it is I said, that's 500,000 units, to
Yeah.
Norway. And he says, all of us. And we need it as soon as possible. And
Wow.
number one, you get the fright because you realize then that, wow, they really think this was somebody. But they had mentioned to us at the time that their supply chain had broken down given the issues. And this was 2 to 3 weeks before Nira Beauty went on the steps in the United States at the state of
I
emergency.
remember it well. Yeah.
So what happened was we kicked off with that. I made some phone calls. The people who helped me raise the funds to buy the facility in Cork, immediately the radar went up. We sat down. We raised 2.5 million in 24 hours. and
Wow.
I think I spent the 2.5 million in half that.
Wow.
And I didn't spend it on obviously thing, but I actually hired two camper vans, and I because my wife suffers a little from some lung issues. I said that we didn't know if there would be an issue, and that I
Mm,
knew I needed to be on site. So I
yeah.
moved into site on the camper van, and I put my bandana on, and I lived on site for 3 weeks, and 4 weeks after we had, sorry, 2 weeks after we had made the agreement with the HSE, trucks started leaving our facilities with
Wow.
full of sanitizer, and and in the end, we were the first ones that delivered to them. In the end, many came to them in the end, but they were months after ourselves.
Mm,
But we secured their supply chain from. We had to bring in we brought alcohol in at the time. We were bringing started to happen. Alcohol was obviously a key component, and that started to get stopped at the borders in the UK and in France. And so I had two trucks of alcohol purchased from France, and they were stopped in Cherbourg, and the police wouldn't let them on. So I made some calls actually through our EO contacts to see could I get alcohol, and I got a contact from actually one of your forum buddies. And they hooked me up with Irish distillers, and Irish distillers and is I can't remember Irish United Northern Distillery up in the dock, and they started shipping us down the 76,000 litre trucks, and we were taking 2 to 3 of them a week from them, and we put them in. And of course, we made it nice because we're cosmetic manufacturers, so we put a nice little polymer in it so that it wasn't harsh on the skin, and
yeah.
we made it smell nice, and we did as good as we could, and we built. I actually built it the Chinese built two hotel or two hospitals. I think in what was it 2 weeks? We
Yeah.
we built. I put on a 2,000. Sorry, I put on 8,000 square foot in the back of our facility to handle it in 24 hours. We hired a guy called the Big Red Barn. He was called, and we brought him to put it down. So literally a huge marquee on the back of our facility.
Wow.
It was an amazing time, and I lived on the site for
So that's what needs a Maverick to do something like that. There's no question about it.
But it was again. You take that. That was say middle of February. It was about this time 5 years ago. No matter what goals we did, what we set out for 2020. On on January the 28th. We could have done a big offsite where we said, this is what we're going to do this year. We're going to do
Yeah,
this. All of that was gone out the window.
of course. Yeah.
Everything was gone. We needed to react and react fast, and we ended up making 9 million units of sanitizer. We made one for everyone in the audience in Ireland, basically.
Wow.
And I don't know where it's all. The HSE took a lot of it. Retail took quite a bit. We did kind of well with it, and that was it. And we reacted when we had to react. And I'd like to think that I'd like to think that a lot of good was done with it at the
You
time.
made a big contribution because at the time we all needed a sanitizer. But of course, that's a great story. But sanitizer came to an end. I mean, how long did that run last before we decided? I mean, what annoys me to some degree is I walk through into a shopping center, hotel, airport, or something, and I see a sanitizer unit, and I go to it now, and there's no sanitizer.
No.
So, so how long did that last?
Well,
Obviously, that was,
I guess the funny thing was about, and it did become. Here's the thing: there was these memes going around, sanitizer manufacturers, and they'd have this kind of wrapper with all the gold chains and gold
yeah,
rings, and you'd smile, of course, and I was getting one every 5 minutes from my friends. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah, hilarious. Yeah,
But the
yeah,
thing is that okay, we actually didn't. We put our normal margin on it. We set it at what it was. We did account for what we felt were going to be rising prices at the time. But if you remember, but at the time, alcohol went from so much a liter, €1 a liter, to €10 a liter or something
yeah,
like
yeah.
that. You know what I mean?
All these
So,
prices went crazy.
so you end up paying it out on one side. You don't make. We made some money, but you end up then buying a load of stock that you put a load of stock that depreciates off, and so you don't make money. You make money, but you don't make money.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
And I remember at the time, then 2 months later, I was in my warehouse walking in. I got a phone call from what I used to call they're kind of lone wolf business guys. You know what I mean? They're dealers. You know what I mean? And
Yeah, yeah,
he said, "I have a ship coming in from Portugal, or from the Far East." He said it's docking in Portugal in such and such a time. And I said that's when the end is going to start. I said because he
yeah,
has to wait until he gets his ships in and stuff like that. But anyways, it did come to an end, and fine. But the trouble is the cosmetic side of the business then fell off the thing. Our original goal at the time was that we would get contracts from larger suppliers. We did. We got the HSE at the time, but they
yeah,
only wanted sanitizer for a short period of time. But of course, we needed to fill that in with people that wanted to, I don't know, make a cheap shampoo for Lidl or something like that. But all of the buyers, everybody in the market all went home and they all started buying off who they were used to buying off, and they were doing meetings online. And
yeah,
it was incredibly difficult then to actually achieve the goals that we had set out in 19 and 20. And that's where by the time 2021 came, we found ourselves then with basically growing to 18 million, 16 to 18 million revenues, to declining all the way back to 7 and 6. But
yeah,
having now expanded into a cost base that was sustaining things, and all of a sudden the business got the worst flu that you could possibly get. And on December the 9th, 2021, a number of issues happened. And I remember sitting literally after a board meeting where I went in and said, "Yeah, things should be okay." Literally, the house of cards collapsed, and we were in trouble. And then in early in 2022, we took the decision. We had to make the decision: do we shut down or do we continue on? There was a viable business there. And then early in 2022, we applied for examinership because we weren't going to be able to meet the needs of the business on an
yeah,
ongoing basis. So we did that, and we were successful in the sense that we said, you know what, there is a very viable business here. At the time, we did have to reduce the staff by 50%, so we let 60 people go, but there were 60 people there. And the business is still going today. We didn't, Lorraine and I didn't reinvest back in. We had the opportunity to, but we felt that, look, maybe we were kind of a little bit burned out maybe after the COVID
which
experience.
is fair enough.
And we kind of said, you know what? Maybe there's something more for us out there. Let's go and do something different now.
Yeah,
And this comes back to the point that maybe you said earlier yourself. We felt we'd done what we could do with that particular business, and we wanted a new energy, new thing. We took a number of months off, then post the examinership. It went into examinership, finished in May 2023 or 2022, and then Lorraine and I left the building, and we moved on to other things. We then disposed of the other brand company and property pieces that we had, rolled it all up and said, right, we're 48, let's restart again. We've made enough money to restart, but not enough to retire. So
yeah,
that's
yeah,
where we restarted on September the 28th, 2022. We opened up the laptop for the first time and said, "Do you know how to log into this?" No
yeah.
idea. So that was it, and that was that. That was that.
And that was the birth of Nyra Beauty. Is that the case?
That was the birth then of Nyra Beauty. It had been originally part of the old business in the sense of during COVID, while people were taking some time, we got them to kind of, the long term vision for that original business was to grow a number of brands out of it so we could sustain both
Yes.
contract and
Yeah.
our own brands.
Yeah.
And to be so we started with some
So
people.
it was an evolution of that idea of growing your
It
own
was an
brand.
evolution of that, and so we had the early stage of that, and then so part of the repurchase of us out of the business at the time was we brought the R&D contingent of that with us,
Okay.
and so we restarted that in September 2023, and that's where it's restarted since, and it has been growing at a very at a fast pace as the usual rock and roll show has continued, and
Uh,
so
we'd expect nothing less of you. So Nyra Beauty is, I think, two things that I know of it. Firstly, it's quite a specialist beauty business in the product you make, and but now you're moving towards direct to retail model. Is
yeah,
that
yeah. Right now, first off, we I guess one of the things we learned was that when I purchased the business original factory in the cosmetics one in Claremorris in 2020 in 2017, I remember a conversation at the time where the guy that was sitting me down, bringing me through, he goes, "You're going to get a lot of people in here, young entrepreneurs, old entrepreneurs, people with good ideas." He said the ones that come in and say that they're going to make something and that they and when we said it on the internet, well, he says, get rid of them out of the office as quick as you can because that never happened. He said, you know
Yeah,
what I mean? He
yeah,
couldn't have been more wrong 4 or 5 years later.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
just
The
that
world changed.
what's happened now is that buyers and retail really want to see a pedigree of e-commerce before they even digital. They want to, like any business, back the sure thing. So we decided not to go near retail until we had a
You had a brand, yeah.
and so now we have a brand. We've serviced about 50,000 customers now.
Wow.
We have a regular kind of nice, solid business in Ireland and growing in the UK. And I guess where we're going to bring it now, where we were in discussions with some retail partners to, we're looking for partners really. How do we service the current 50,000 customers we have? And also then how do we grow it? The upside of being in retail rather than just in e-commerce is it is a validation in one sense
Yeah,
because people go into the shops, they see you there, they go back and they go, okay, well this is it's true, it's here, I can see it. The other
yeah.
side of it is as well is that obviously because then the you get more bang for your buck on your marketing on the e-commerce side because people there's more
Of course.
awareness of your brand. So
And
that's
you control the customer, I suppose.
yeah.
Is the so the cosmetics beauty space, is that a very competitive space, and how have you carved out a niche? Because the one thing that's clear is that business, you've had enormous highs and enormous lows in the business. So you talked about being, early in the conversation, being older and wise. You're definitely older and wiser now. So both of you, yourself and Lorraine, are now going into this with a huge amount of technical, commercial, and business experience. So it seems like but is it a competitive? I suppose everything is a competitive market. And
Yeah,
how are you carving out the piece that makes Nyra different from everything else that's on the shelf?
well, yeah, look, it is a competitive market. Skincare and cosmetics are, as everyone knows, it's
Mm.
like somebody bringing out a new soft drink or something like that. You
Yeah,
have to have something that stands alone for us. We focus primarily on people that are in the maybe going through a hormonal kind of journey that are maybe 35 plus. We were really back at the start pre-COVID. We were kind of the first to be begin discussions on menopause, etc. That now is much more popular. But we do discuss that with regards to the products that we make and position are for that hormonal journey. So I guess that's allowed us to appeal to a demographic that sometimes feels invisible, Paul, in the sense of they everybody walks down the street and they see the young fresh lady
yeah,
that she's applying the skin. That isn't the way maybe every what I would call maybe mid 50s lady perceives herself.
mm,
And so what we're doing is positioning that for them there so that, and also that particular demographic is very honest and very integral. And so they know they get marketed to quite heavily.
yeah.
But as well as that, then they, I guess, positioning with where Lorraine has quite a lot of pedigree in that particular market. That integrity carries through then, and people begin to engage with that quite a bit.
And then you're getting loyal, retaining customers.
Absolutely, and I'm learning a hell of a lot on e-commerce. And I have to say, I wasn't ever in marketing, but I tell you, if I knew now, if I knew then what I know now, I tell you,
Well, do you know, as we come to the end of this conversation, we've done full loop, and it's been so interesting. But as you're telling me the story of how you're positioning Naira now, I'm
yeah,
kind of remembering that young fella cutting lawns, and I mean, it's having that insight. I mean, because that's what, understanding your market is having the insight to realize, old ladies, widows are a perfect market, and if I provide them a very good service, they will pay me. And the wisdom to niche in and to realize, I think it's one of the super gifts of business is to understand, because I've made this mistake. Understand, I don't want to serve anyone, I want to serve these people here. And that's something you learned in your cutting laws, and I think you're implying that now. Aiden, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I think there's uh, to me you've outlined such a journey in entrepreneurship that's gone highs and lows and has returned to a great success with how Nyra Beauty is developing. And I think there's so much to be learned there from us people are already in business, but get the insight from other entrepreneurs. And I imagine a lot of people listening are new to business and wondering what it's all about. And I think they just got the works and understand what it's all about. So, Aiden, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, boy. It's been a wonderful journey in the sense of would I do it again? I'll always smile and go absolutely. But I mean, it's not for the faint-hearted. You know?
Would you do it again? My guess is you have no choice.
Absolutely, no choice. That HR person just isn't hiring me.
It just isn't. Aiden, thank you very, very much.
Thanks.